Andrew,
Andrew.
strong and masculine. Right? It's a good name. I happen to enjoy it. You have written about the heart, and from what I've seen of your presence, the heart of a warrior, the heart of a leader, the heart of a father. What is the heart to you, and why does it fascinate you?
Well, first off, I appreciate those reflections. I'm glad to hear that's kind of what you're receiving in what I write, because that is a lot of the intention behind it. That the heart shows up in many capacities. It's not just all unconditional love and compassion all the time. There's different forms it takes. It can take the form as like tough love and um, really like forging ahead through challenges, but also it does have that capacity for patience and understanding. So for me, the heart is, it's your physical organ too. That's important to include. I mean, it's what keeps the body running, the brain going, and everything in between. But to me, it's emotional and energetic and spiritual. It's kind of this seat in the center of your being, as far as where you can connect with the divine, where you can feel, where it's this inner guidance system too that kind of intersects between like the physical, emotional, and spiritual. So it's, to me, the heart is this multifaceted, just really beautiful idea, but also reality. There's so much that happens in the heart, and I think learning to pay attention to that is essential, especially as a man, as a father. And I think this idea around like a heart-led warrior is important to me, because we do live in a physical world where there's a physical aspect of being a warrior, like the doing, the action, the discipline, like kind of the grit to it. But there's also the heart is like your purpose behind it, your why, the thing that really fuels that action and discipline. It's not just like empty and mechanical. There's got to be more of like the feeling for it, like you're usually doing it for your family, or just something more than yourself. That's so that those are some of the driving forces for me around that.
Yeah, that's good. That's nice. All the different qualities, like you said, the energetic, the emotional, the spiritual, also the practical, all these facets, and then, like you said, the heart as a center. I think of it something like the origin.
Mm,
And as we follow back these different aspects of our lives, we find that they converge into a single point. So if we have a multifaceted heart at the center, then each of those facets are reflections of how our emotions or energy or spirit is expressed in the different areas of our life. And like you said about recognizing that the practical and the soft and also the hard, the disciplined and also the encouraging elements of how we operate all do point back to and converge on that single source of being. And finding ways to contact that source and understand yourself in that way and accept yourself in that way, I think is very valuable. It's very valuable. So it's a good mission that you have, and I hope that as you pursue it, you continue to learn, and the learning that you share with others, I think, will benefit them, because it's true that in a lot of ways, um, our hearts have been hidden from us because of distractions of the mind and distractions of the body that we get caught up in our culture. And there are opportunities to get pulled out of those distractions. There's choices that we can make, and there's circumstances that can show us and force us to face the reality of who we are. And one of those things, certainly, I would say, would be fatherhood,
mm,
as you you talk about with your child, and happy birthday to her.
Yeah, thank you.
What is it about fatherhood that turns a boy who's following his passions and who's making decisions unconsciously into a man who recognizes needs and makes decisions intentionally? How is it that fatherhood encourages that transformation?
Yeah, I think the number one shift that really initiates and then paves the way for that is that it's not all about you anymore. Like you said, when you're kind of in that boy growing into like your younger adulthood, you have your passions, your curiosities, your desires, and there's nothing really holding you back from exploring those. You have that freedom to just play a little bit. But once a child comes along, it's not, there's no longer, your actions don't just affect you anymore. It's affecting those around you, your partner, your the family dynamic, the situation. So there needs to be more mindfulness around what you're doing and the consequence of that. And so, if you want to go out and still party and socialize and you're, pregnant or just new mother partner is back at home, like what example is that going to set? Um, so it really is about being more diligent with your time and your energy and and where you're directing your attention. And I think that's a big shift because yeah, for me especially, that realization of most of my time is no longer my own was a very big adjustment. I didn't always navigate it so skillfully. I still wanted to go out and do those socializing and party type things. And as a younger father, I did do that, not to the point of like neglect, but definitely it caused a lot of tension and conflict within the home family. And, me, to my still immature mind, it was like, well, what's the big deal? Like if it's one night a weekend or whatever, but that's how you end up justifying it. So that continuing to go about that does kind of create the situation where you're forced to look at it like, no, this is like kind of the old things that I wanted to do and that were important and that I could do, but now there's this shift in identity to where it's not like, sure, you can continue to do those things, but there will be more severe consequences. And like you can choose to fully neglect like the role that is calling you forward, but again, to only your detriment. And you can try and repress that as much as you want, but that comes back around in life in a lot of ways. So, neglecting the transformation that life is calling you forward, i.e. fatherhood, is like, you do have a choice there, but like, it's making more of a conscious choice is like that big step up. And so yeah, making it that it doesn't become about you anymore is kind of, I think, the biggest thing. So
Yeah, there's a visceral reality that sinks in when you realize that it's your wants that are competing against this other person's needs.
yes.
And that person's needs being fulfilled depend on us setting aside our wants. But there's a beauty in that. When we do that, we discover, like you said, you said the phrase a shift of identity.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of heard that as recognizing that your child shares in your identity,
Mm-hmm.
that they are essentially a piece of you that is growing in the world alongside you. And to value another life as your own life really helps to commit to satisfying those needs and to set aside those wants. And in doing that, there's a real human need for purpose and for connection that gets satisfied in you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. My friend, when I was early on, my friend's mother said it best. It's like you never knew you could love something so much. And it's just the most daunting and liberating thing all at once as well, because because the stakes are so much higher, because all of a sudden it is not just about you anymore, and it is life, literal life on the line, and like you now have to be there for that, show up, and like be the provider and protector, and not as much physical, like defending from threats all the time warrior sense any as it used to be, like back in ancient cultures when it was more about survival, but there still is a level of like warriorship that needs to be embodied, because there is still like danger in the world, and you need to like be there to protect against, and like you have this sensitive, like fragile being that is your child that's like depends on you wholly, and that's it's a big deal. So it is scary, but it's also like it leaning into that in a way that's like, okay, thank you creator for this gift. Now how can I show up for it and be in service and become better and improve myself for it? So
Hmm. Yeah, being in service and being in a physical protector, that is something that you practice in your work as well.
yeah.
Do you want to talk about that at all, and maybe some lessons that your work has taught you about
Yeah.
fatherhood and service?
Yeah. No, it is a good segue, because next to fatherhood, my work as a paramedic, um, I work as a paramedic in a big city, so it's quite a call volume. There's a lot that I get to see, and so with that, one of the questions around how does that relate to like my writing, and also just how my views with the world. It the first thing that I pondered on is that it just continuously brings me to this state of like just awe and wonder for life and like the human condition. That it is such a privilege and a responsibility to see like the lens on life that I get to see through that perspective. You know, being able to take care of sick and vulnerable and injured people, and just all a whole different array of like kind of calls that people make towards for ambulances. There's just, as much as there is like the physical need, there's also again the energetic, emotional, and sometimes even spiritual need. Like there's such a wide array of different roles I get to play and different kind of hats I get to wear. And so it's just constantly challenging me to be more compassionate, more selfless. Like, if it's when I have to work a few overnight shifts and it's 3 in the morning and I would just rather go to sleep, it's like really needing to remind myself, like, no, I chose this, I signed up for this, like I am in a position, like this person needs help to whatever capacity, and I get to be here to do that. So it's about stepping out of my own needs to a certain extent, because there is the conversation around like self-care, especially in this job, to be able to do the job. So that's a different leg of the conversation. But again, going back to it, it's like stepping out of that to a certain extent to, just be there and be of service, and whatever that looks like or is needed in the conversation or in the situation. And it could be, you know, like doing CPR and the really high adrenaline stuff, but it also could just be someone who's like having a bad day, who has not had the best attention or care, that like just needs a calming voice. It's quite a variety of different things that I get to do and see. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not a job that I think that I would have the capacity to do. So I'm glad that you're doing it.
Well, we
I
all have our
think,
own paths, so I appreciate that, though. Appreciate the
yeah,
acknowledgement.
I think that what you said about self-care is relevant. When you're serving these people, it's easy to think about medical care as a
Hmm.
technical
Right.
process, right? Because we have this sort of language. There's all sorts of jargon that you
Hmm.
guys are using all the time, and when somebody's watching a show on TV and the paramedics show up and it's this, and it's all efficiency and speed. And um, in the show, it's generally about getting to the next scene or getting this point
Mm-hmm.
done, that this person was injured, they're being cared for, everything's, the paramedics fine, they have their technical service. But for a person who is processing a medical event, oftentimes it is the most intense and frightening moments in their life, and the person who's there with them in that experience is you. So it seems to me that having the throughput within yourself for these experiences to get processed is something that really would push you back to discovering your heart. Whereas if it does not find its expression and it doesn't find its path through your system, then it gets stuck within that center and festers and then expresses itself dysfunctionally, and until that dysfunction can be followed back to a cause that's then processed, that allows you to continue to move forward. But do you have any thoughts on that, on the connection between the discovery and the function and awareness of the function of your heart that your work has given you, and being able to
Yeah,
apply that to your work, to your creativity and your other relationships?
absolutely. So, yeah, what you said, there's a lot of the technical medicine, a lot of like knowing your medication dosages, your anatomy and physiology, um, different interventions, clinical assessments. That's all the technical, but and that's important. But yeah, with what you spoke to as far as the person experiencing the emergency or being in an ambulance, it's a very emotionally intense thing to experience, and that is where it gets, it's not, we're no longer just doing the technical stuff. It's where we need to, I need to address like the emotional, energetic needs as well, like being able to maintain a sense of calm and, um, and just reassurance and care. And so that does requires me to get like a little out of the head technical stuff and like really tune in to my heart, you know, like, and just being able to hold space for people in those like situations, is a very, it does need frequent reminding, for like frequent reminders to self, because like for me it is very just natural, like, oh, I'm in an ambulance every time I work in one, I'm doing these things. But for the person that is calling the ambulance, they're most of the time not. This is there's a reason they call an ambulance, and this is not just an everyday thing for them. So it's really maintaining that level of like humility and compassion as well, and being able to, um, alleviate the stresses around that and still like maintain, yeah, just that composure, but also like being empathetic and sympathetic. And so yeah, that's those are important qualities. And then there is such a thing as like compassion fatigue as well. This goes back to self-care and being able to like have those things in my personal life that like bring me back to center and like recharge into where I can keep my own cup full, and so I can keep giving from that. Because otherwise, if it's getting a little like out of sorts to where I'm not taking care of myself, then that takes away from what I can give to people in that setting. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a different responsibility on the leader
yes,
to, yeah, to, like you said, maintain their composure while holding a frame of empathy and patience. And that, to me, that seems very relevant to parenting.
yeah,
Um,
right.
yeah, and because dealing with a distraught child is oftentimes, I think, not that different from dealing with a distraught patient, right?
No, in all honesty, it is, especially in those higher stress situations. I mean, there is the tendency of human psychology to regress a little bit, just the more adrenaline
Mm.
fueled, just kind of reactionary stuff. And that is a lot of stuff that we learn in childhood. So sometimes it is just really like, in a metaphorical sense, kind of shifting to this like firm but like compassionate parent demeanor of like, no, like I I see that you're having trouble processing this emotionally, but here's what I'm seeing, and here's this sense of calm that I can try and convey, and like, all right, and it's also like it is like a two-way dance in a sense that like you're teaching your child to handle difficult emotions and that they're valid, but also like it's still somewhat their responsibility to like regulate that. And so having that conversation with adults in that setting too, it's like I can only do so much for you. You can meet me. You need to meet me halfway as well, and like acknowledge what you're feeling, but also like kind of try and like coach through some practices of like self-regulation as well. So,
Hmm. Yeah, it's important to accept the emotion, and it's
mhm,
important to choose your actions consciously despite the emotion.
correct. Easier
Yeah,
said
for
than done,
sure.
but that is the idea.
Yeah. And is there any way that your writing ties into this?
So
Because yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that these themes and the relationship between service and leadership and fatherhood and the heart, both of compassion and of courage, is somehow driving you to express yourself and to have a creative outlet.
Yeah. So I've
What's that like for you?
yeah, I've been writing for a long time, like almost 10 years now personally. I didn't really start writing
Oh,
online more
okay.
consistently for until like the last couple of years. And again, it's been semi consistent with intermittent hiatuses, you know. But I've been writing has been with me for a long time, and I would say right now, you know, what I do with my work and my roles and just my experiences, it especially with my work right now, it's more of like kind of the qualitative backdrop to where it's like these I have all these like really just intense and thought provoking and feeling provoking experiences, and there's always this kind of like I go to work, like I work my shifts, and then like when I have the few days off, it's like there's this just processing and decompressing happening, and it's kind of more the energetic component of it to where it's not so much directly what I'm writing about, like those stories specifically, but it's more again back to just like this experience I get to have with just so many different people on so many different points of like the emotional and energetic landscape, and then it's how it's weighing up against like my own perspectives, spiritual beliefs, how I'm like experiencing my own human life, and then just how there's just this constant, just all these different people and different stories. So it's more just this like widening of my perspective and just what I'm able to, how it deepens my own capacity to go into my heart, and then slowly being able to kind of like distill like the stories and the lessons and the challenges that feel most like pertinent to kind of my more direct ideas. So I feel in time as I continue to practice with that, it will more directly like I'll be able to kind of write about like specific stories and like different things that I notice or observe in different lessons. But like, yeah, I'd say right now it's more just like the energetic component of it. So
Yeah. What does the word energetic mean for you? Can you describe or
yeah,
clarify that somewhat, contrasting with emotional and spiritual?
I when you frame it like that, I feel energetic contains like the emotional and the spiritual, but it's also
Okay.
for me that there's some things that like I can feel or kind of like see in my mind, but it's not something I could as easily put language to. It's not so much like I can put this emotion or this like spiritual perspective on it. Like it's kind of just this feeling that might be like beyond language as of yet. Like that doesn't mean that it won't come into like being able to process it more emotionally or like through more of a my spiritual lens. But yeah, it's kind of that thing that's like just a little more like ethereal, harder to like really put into like a more clear idea. So that's kind of what energetic um, means to me.
Yeah, that sounds like it's related to intuition.
Yeah, yeah, I think that'd be accurate. Where it's like it's something that I know that I want to be able to like put more into like words or an idea or try and describe, but it's still like almost just kind of eluding that grasp for like in certain moments. So
Yeah, it seems like the sort of thing that is that has a poetic nature,
mm,
to where if you were to define it too strictly, then you lose too much of the quality of the experience or of the insight. And
yeah,
it demands a more artistic and expansive expression.
I I like that reflection a lot. Yeah, I think that that feels right, and also it's like what that speaks to is when it would come to like trying to put it into words or a poem or a story. It's kind of staying like right in the middle of that like head to heart, like being able to use the head to like put it into language but not thinking too much about it to where you get into like that analysis paralysis and it's becomes something that is like too mechanical or intellectual and then yeah you lose like the feeling of it. So
Yeah, there's definitely tension there between the intuition and the definition of
mm,
finding
yeah,
both, to both maintain a connection to the experience and to hold on to the resonance of that within your inner landscape, but then to be able to share it
yeah,
with someone else. And so to convey meaning, it has to be packaged within these words that have kind of strict boundaries, right? And
right,
I've been asking you about words in this conversation because
yeah,
for for those boundaries to function, they need to be held in common, right? We need to agree that this word means this thing so that when we use it, we both understand that it's pointing to a shared reference point, right?
right.
And
A boundary is a
there's
reference
there's a
to
real to the meaning, yeah.
yeah,
And
yeah,
there's a challenge there because like we said earlier, your ultimate reference point for your thoughts and actions and feelings is within your heart, of
yes,
which we are, of what, yeah, and of the heart we see these different facets of it. But it's like that intuition, the heart has an intuitive quality where as as a complete thing, it eludes our grasp, right? Because it is the source of our experience. And so we cannot use the experience to go back and grasp its source,
mm, yeah,
right? Because the lesser doesn't grasp the greater. So it's challenging because you are an expression of your heart and I am an expression of my heart. And the words that we have are like little hearts that have these different
mm,
facets that float between us that we're trying to use to bridge that gap. And it sounds to me like when you talked about how you would like or have an idea that you would like to include more literal stories or more direct experience in your writing, but that you've held back from that, that there's tension in that as well between where you are, where you would like to be, and the meaning that hangs between those states that you're currently traveling on.
mm.
Do you want to talk more about why it doesn't feel right to express more literal experiences and more direct stories that ground the intuitions that you're having?
Yeah, maybe, of course, my first instinct was a bit of resistance, like, no, I'm not holding back. But, as I think about it more, I think that is actually probably accurate. Um, that there is like a level, because I think there's a level of unknown when you're reaching into like the more intuitive, to where like you can't fully see what you want to bring into form. There is a level of just kind of letting it take its own course, and you just get to collaborate and be along for the ride. So yeah, maybe there's an element of fear around that, and more, and maybe some insecurity around like, oh, I'm not the best storyteller, like uh, whatever doubt or that might be attached to that. And it also, you know, maybe in the logical sense, like language is to me such a paradox, especially the English language. It is so elaborate and technical, and like it has grown to have the ability to describe such a vast array of things, and yet in the same breath, like language is limiting. So it does it's this challenge to bring in the art form of like what you feel and are intuiting, and then to translate that in a sense. And yeah, it is this level of kind of letting go. And yeah, I think probably, yeah, fear or self-doubt or insecurity is still lingers there, as far as like really taking more of a step forward to like share more of the stories that feel to want to be shared, but like it's not maybe packaged prettily enough in my brain, or it's not or like, yeah, there's some doubt in the ability to carry it. So that,
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, I would encourage you that there is no one more able to tell your stories than you.
Hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, really,
um,
that's one of those things I hear, but to like be reminded of it frequently is important, because it can be cliche, but I think it's only things become cliche when you're just not grasping like the emotional significance of it, and like there is there is a lot of truth to that. So
mhm. Yeah, I think it sometimes takes a lot of setup for a cliche to land,
yeah,
because it, a kind of vulnerability has to be established, because cliches are very simple usually, but it's the
hmm,
simplest things that are generally the hardest to learn.
truly,
Because yeah, because a simple it's like you said about the English language. The English language is highly technical, highly specific, which is a reflection of our modern sensibility with our scientific definition based understanding of meaning.
yeah,
It's a less experiential understanding of meaning. And so people look to other cultures, other languages for words that are broader, that allow for a greater depth of meaning, than, yeah, the jargon that English
hmm,
churns out. And a cliche is like that because, being simple, it has far reaching implications, but a very general meaning. And so, because it's not highly specific or technical, we have been trained to think of it as that simple is stupid,
right.
right? But it's
It's
the
not
simple
complex enough.
things that, right, this complexity is always grounded in simplicity. A complicated idea that doesn't have a fundamental is probably bullshit.
Probably.
But it's challenging because to include a simple idea, then there's a lot of complexity and a lot of specificity in how we act and how our life plays out that then becomes informed by that simple concept. And so when we integrate that simple concept, it tends to have far reaching implications for our life. So it's a challenging and a difficult thing to do. And the way that a cliche is often expressed flippantly, there's not the relational or the contextual support for that process. And so it it bypasses. But yeah, to reiterate, your heart and the facets of it are unique to you. And so the intuition that flows out of it and the expression that that intuition finds is also necessarily unique to you. And so if I heard of the events that passed one night that you were involved in and I relayed those events, it would be a different story and a different meaning than if you
Mm,
relayed those events.
yeah.
And for you to yeah, and for you to ground your intuition in real experience, the story can be helpful because it's demonstrative and it it takes the meaning that is general and specifies it and offers a shared reference point for the reader to understand your intuition more clearly, I think. So it's the story is useful as a tool that way and uniquely useful to you.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's a good reminder. And because that would be one of the stories attached to like whatever self doubt is like, oh, how often has this idea been shared before? How widely has this been disseminated? So it's really honing back into like no matter how much a general idea has been shared, that there's still so many unique angles to approach it from. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so
Yeah, there's a line that the Apostle Peter wrote where he says that it's necessary to bring things to remembrance, to remind people. And there's an interview I watched recently with Jordan Peterson, and it was an excellent interview. I don't think that he said anything I haven't heard him say before. But hearing it in a new way, in a new context, broadens and deepens the integration of the concept. And so everything has been said, right? And everything has been learned and known, but not everything has been experienced because experience requires a specific lens and a specific context. And your lens and your context are an opportunity for what has already been known to be rediscovered.
yeah, no, and that's a newer idea I'm learning to embrace is celebrating, like repeating myself, or like that's actually the intention is to really like repeat a lot of these things just in slightly different ways, because especially when it comes to the internet and sales or business, it's most people don't jump for whatever the offer is, whatever it is on the first, second, or third try. It's or even like integrate the information or learn something or whatever the outlet is. It often takes just the repeating of it over and over again to like hone that idea in. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. Because we
Mm-hmm.
do all have our own
Yeah,
story, and you don't know who could benefit from that in the way that you have to share it. So
yeah, yeah, not at all. And and that's so valuable, the opportunity to reach out and impact somebody and to have a relationship with them through your words that lasts, that persists through
yeah,
time in a way that the experience that inspired the story doesn't. So then that experience gains value and participates in humanity in a deeper way by being shared. Yeah.
100%.
Well, is there anything else you would like to add or anything you'd like to ask me?
Yeah, how I guess what's one way that fatherhood has brought you into your heart?
Oh, it's so funny because I knew that a family would force me to become better,
Hmm.
and it would provide the incentives that I wasn't able to fabricate, because I could tell myself, oh, I need to do this or I need to do that. But there wasn't a felt sense of need that was
Right.
genuine. And so it was easier for me to ignore my responsibilities. But becoming married and having someone offer me accountability, and then having children and having somebody offer me purpose, through serving their needs, oh, it has been such a fulfillment of life for me,
Hmm.
because it's funny because I look at my children and I think, oh, I expect better of you. And I have to remind myself, it's not fair for me to expect better of my children than I expect of myself.
Hmm.
And it's easy to see how attitudes and behavior are harming my child. And then I need to recognize where those attitudes and behavior came from. So it's
Yeah.
really holding up a mirror and showing me what it is that I have to improve and the opportunities that I have to improve, not in the sense of obligation that, oh, I need to be better just to be better because
Right.
that's what's demanded, but the opportunity to experience a more fulfilling and joyful life.
Yeah.
Because pursuing wants and pursuing pleasures, the hedonistic 20 something partying who believes that they're having fun, but that partying is really an expression of unmet need. And there's a
Yes.
person who's looking for something and going into an environment that can't provide it. But the home and the family do provide it. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for my girls and my wife and the opportunities that they've given me to learn and grow, and to see them learn and grow, and to look at myself as more than an individual but a member of a greater body.
Yeah.
And I think that's something in our culture. Our culture's too individualistic, and people don't recognize that their reality is actually an expression of the relationships around them. You are your relationships. And
100%.
so, yeah, and the core of that is your family and your closest friends and whoever is adjacent to you that is beside you through your life. And you are a unit. And our ancestors had a family, a tribal, a clannish, a national identity that scaled, that they were embedded in, that they were part of. And cutting yourself off from that cuts you off from so much meaning, so much relationship, and so much realization of yourself that can be rediscovered by investing in, not necessarily just in family, but in mentorship relationships, because having a child gives you someone who's depending on you rather than being a person who's depending on everybody else and taking from everybody else. You learn that you have something to offer and something to give. And yeah, I wouldn't be doing this podcast, or I wouldn't be writing online, or I don't know how I would have learned that I have something to give if my children didn't teach me.
Yeah. No, that's beautifully put. Fatherhood is, I think, the most potent vehicle for self-development. It holds up such a crystal clear mirror for everything, and yeah, it can be very uncomfortable and confronting. But if you have the willingness to like continue to look back at yourself every time you're triggered or you're reactive or you're projecting something onto your child, whether it's warranted or not, it's like, okay, where is this coming from? And if I'm going to, like you said, expect this, how am I living up to this expectation? Am I asking more of my child than I would of myself? And so it really is this razor sharp um, checking in device where
Yeah.
you're, yeah. So,
Yeah, I think the other the other aspect that I would like to mention is that when I'm able to be patient with my child or generous with my child, or when I see how I'm able to be stable for them and help them through their process, and then I consider that as a human, I'm a child of my creator, God,
Mm,
that offers an insight into a relationship with God where God's patience and generosity and mercy through the object lesson of parenting um, have given me a lot of comfort and a lot of peace knowing the forgiveness of a parent and the kindness of a parent and the will of a parent for their child to succeed. And not that the child needs to execute perfectly or do everything right, but as long as the child is willing to be open, to communicate, to be present in the relationship and accept the process, um, I just want the best. I just want everything for them. And if we take that
yeah.
attitude towards our life, I think that that attitude is rewarded and life abounds. So,
Mm, yeah. And on a personal note too, I like the image of your adult self being able to parent your child self, you know, like in the lens of like just more therapeutic approach to like whatever childhood wounds we carry, like being able to acknowledge them in a way that you're showing up for yourself now, and you can like bring that healing forth. And then yeah, when you have a child, you can like embody it further. Like, no, this is what I would have wanted for myself as a child, so now I can give this. So
yeah, that's very interesting. It's like there's these three axes where you have the world through space where you're interacting with other people. You have that's a horizontal, and then you have the vertical connection to the divine, and then you have the other horizontal connection that goes through time as a relationship with yourself. And that's true. I've had that experience as well, looking at the experiences that my child is having and comparing it to my memories.
yeah,
And there's a toxic element of that you hear about, where parents push their children to fulfill the dreams that they
right.
never did.
That would be the shadow
But there's
side of it.
also an yeah, for sure. But there's also an element of recognizing through your care for your child that you're able to forgive the circumstances of your own childhood, and and find gratitude, not necessarily for the pain, but for the opportunity to resolve that dynamic, to be able to pass on something better and something healthier, something more alive, and giving closure to that struggle. Yeah, that is. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is an important aspect that I think every parent would experience. You can't help but compare, and
No,
compare to other people and compare to your past self. And yeah, there's a there's a lot of value just in being able to see two situations side by side as a first person experiencer. So
yeah,
yeah, that's
yeah,
well, this has been great.
I agree.
I appreciate you coming on in the conversation and your insight into these ideas. It's stimulating, and I hope people find some value from it. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you,
thank
and
you. I'm gonna have to look back on
goodbye.